We're going to read God's Word. Okay, that's there from Exodus chapter 19. We've been working through Exodus, and we've come to chapter 19, chapter 20. So, Exodus chapter 19, reading from verse 9. The Lord said to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you, and will always put their trust in you. Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Make them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, Be careful that you do not go up to the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain will surely be put to death. He will surely be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on him. Whether man or animal, he shall not be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they then go up to the mountain. After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, Prepare yourselves for the third day. Abstain from sexual relations. On the morning of the third day there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, Go down and warn the people so that they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. Moses said to the Lord, The people cannot come up Mount Sinai, because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy. The Lord replied, Go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the men must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. And then from chapter 20, verse 18. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, Speak to us yourself and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you, to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance, while Moses approached thick darkness where God was. Amen. Ali.
Thanks, Doug. Good morning. Double hot ankle. Hi, Colin. Hi, Heather. Good to see you. Good to see everyone else too. Can I just reinforce what Doug was saying earlier about the half-yearly members meeting? Really would love to see as many people come along to that as possible. We really want to hear your voice, and we really want to gather together, and we always come out encouraged, and so please do your best to prioritise coming along to that if you can. Exodus chapter 19 is a significant chapter in the book. It's coming up to halfway through the book of Exodus, but it's the place where God called his people to be his treasured possession, to be a holy nation, where he invited them to come and live in unique relationship with him. They had reached Mount Sinai after 2 or 3 months, and this was the place where they were going to camp for about a year. And this is the place where they are through the rest of Exodus, through Leviticus, through Numbers, and halfway through Deuteronomy. So this is where they are for the next wee while. But this is a moment where we learn a lot about God, because it is here that he reveals his holiness. And it's a really vivid story that Doug just read just now. So I want to encourage us all, excuse me, I don't know what's happening here. I want to encourage us all to really let our imagination and emotions to be free as we try to picture and try to what the Israelites saw and felt. That's your challenge today, should you choose to accept it. This God's presence was all in preparation for them, because they were about to receive the law, the Ten Commandments, very well known in Exodus chapter 20. So, next slide, please. Before that, God needed to get the attention of Israel. Early in my work experience or my career, I worked for Short Brothers in Belfast as an engineer, and I worked in what was called the Defence Systems Department. Sometime around the year 1990, somewhere in and around there, the company was designated as a legitimate target for the IRA. That came as quite a shock to some of us working there. And the company started to receive threatening calls and bomb scares, suggesting that a bomb had been placed in the premises. And each time this happened, we would have to be evacuated from the premises. And we couldn't return until they were declared safe. Maybe a couple of hours would pass by. And after many of these bomb scares, we started to become very relaxed about it. In fact, it became quite part of the routine. We went to coffee shops, each other's houses, 10-pin bowling. Indeed, suspicion was coming up that some of us were making the bomb scare had come in. One actually exploded on the premises. We heard it, and that changed everything. From that point onwards, we took every threat seriously. We weren't dandering out when a phone call came in. We were out as quick as we could get. This is a story where God did something dramatic and frightening. And in doing so, he caught the attention of the people of Israel. You see, he needed to drown out the noise of their lives. And sometimes God does that, doesn't he? Even today, to the world and to us as individuals, to remind us of who he is, to catch our attention. And in this story, we learn of a God of thunder, a God of fire, a God who reveals his glory to his people. And we are going to see in this remarkable chapter that God used this to grab their attention, to show them that he is a God of holiness. Next slide. That he is a God of power, and that he is a God of mercy. So let's look at the first one of those headings. God is holy. Central to this chapter is the fact that God is holy. The theme runs through from start to finish. God is holy. He's separate. He's other. He's higher. But he's not just holy. He's the very definition of holiness and goodness and purity. And this is the fundamental divide between God and his creation, that he is holy and we are not. We are fallen. In fact, he's so holy that to be in his presence is dangerous. Because if someone was to get too close to God, then they could be overwhelmed by his holiness. And so God gave the instructions to Moses and to the people to prepare, because he was going to reveal something of himself as he arrived at Mount Sinai. And Moses announced, prepare yourselves for the third day. This was the first day, so in 2 days' time, I am going to meet you. The Lord will come down on Mount Sinai and make his presence known to all the people. And so the people needed to be consecrated. And I imagine there was prayer going on there, confession, getting rid of anything that could be a barrier between a person and God. And they were instructed to wash their clothes, suggesting getting rid of impurity, not just an outward impurity, but character renewal. Limits were placed around the mountain so that people couldn't come too close. Do not approach the mountain, they were told. Married couples were to abstain from sleeping together. They had to be ready because in a couple of days, something very dramatic was going to happen. There was a real sense of anticipation. What would happen in 2 days' time? What would God's presence feel like if he's coming here and we are looking up at Sinai and he is going to be there? What would that feel like? I remember completing the Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award. Let me just show hands. How many people did the Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award here? Oh, yes, yes. Very few highly disciplined individuals here. I remember doing it at school, and when you do the Gold Award, like many others, you're given the opportunity to go and meet Prince Philip at the palace. And I went one summer's day to Kensington Palace with my mum. The invitation was in gold writing, and we passed through the security, which was a lot less than it would be today, probably. But we were ushered into this beautiful room with high ceilings and paintings everywhere. And it was really, really impressive. And then we were put into groups, clusters of people, and the parents were all set off to the side. We were the ones that were going to meet Prince Philip. And we were given some instructions as to how to address the prince. You don't have to say, Your Majesty. You don't have to bow or curtsy. But you did have to wait for him to speak before you spoke to him. A local peer was with us called Lord Dunleith from the Ards Peninsula area. He accompanied us in our little group, or our large group, and we waited then in silence for the door to open. We were really quite afraid. We didn't know what to expect. And when the door opened, Lord Dunleith bowed to the ground in ceremonial grandeur. And then Prince Philip, he really wasn't that big. He came over and there was a kind of moment of silence as we waited for him to speak. And he spoke. He asked us about our experience of the expedition. In all our preparation, we hadn't thought about answering any questions. So there was this sort of tumbleweed moment of silence. I'm thinking, what am I going to say about the expedition? And then one young man said, I done it on my bike. The mother's head dropped. Prince Philip said, good. He walked on. What an anti-climax. But that was it. I'm glad I went. But there was this fear of nothing. For the Israelites, there was a real sense of anticipation, but there was not going to be any anticlimax here. And so the third day came, and the people waited on the plain beneath the mountain. And verse 16 says, on the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, and everyone in the camp trembled. I'm sure, like me, you've been in a thunderstorm before. Recently, we were in the Alps, and when you experience a thunderstorm in a mountain range, it's so loud and so dramatic and quite frightening. But I imagine this was nothing in comparison to what the Israelites experienced, because there was more than thunder. and there was more than lightning and thick cloud. Verse 17 says, they stood at the foot of the mountain, and Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. Imagine what that would have looked like. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. What must that have been like? And chapter 20 tells us that they trembled with fear, and therefore they stayed at a distance. Maybe at the beginning they were wanting to get close, but very quickly they trembled with fear and they stayed at a distance. It's not surprising. They were afraid. Actually, it would seem that the fear of God was intended, because Moses said, the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. This fear was a kind of preservative, to take God seriously and to drive them to purity. Proverbs 19, very familiar verse to many, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There's a theme of this type of awe running through the Bible. And often in my desire to convey the beautiful message of grace, and what a fantastic message and a wonderful message it is, to portray that message, I'm too quick to move from the fearsomeness and awe of God to the gospel message. In fact, it's part of the gospel message. It's not a comfortable subject just how fearsome God actually is, how holy he is. And that's why Hebrews 12 tells us to worship him with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. But for the child of God, the fear of God is not something that we run away from. It's about having reverence and awe. Something that will impact the way I live. It means submitting to his will and worshipping him in amazement and adoration. It was a very timely message for the Israelite nation, because they had started to really treat God with a bit of contempt. To them, God had been a kind of convenient deliverer. He'd become a helper, not someone to be worshipped. And they needed to learn that God is holy and God is awesome. He's not to be treated lightly. He's not my buddy. But the experience was to teach them more than the fact that God is holy. They also learned that God is powerful. The people needed to hear this because they were going to move into the land of Canaan, and they were going to face enemy after enemy and battle after battle. And they needed to know that not only God is powerful, but God is for them. Yes, they had already experienced his deliverance from Egypt and how he helped them against the Egyptians and how he helped them against the Amalekites. But this experience at Sinai was going to be a reminder to them of the God who is for them, who is supremely and awesomely powerful and is more than capable of defending them against their enemies. But the battle was not just against flesh and blood. There was a spiritual battle to be won. You see, the Canaanites worshipped this god called Baal. And Baal was seen as the sun god or the storm god, also a god of fertility. And usually Baal was depicted with a lightning bolt. But anyone at Sinai who saw what they saw would understand clearly who is the one who has ultimate power over nature. Was Jehovah God. This was a statement to the powers of darkness and to Israel that Jehovah God is the only all-powerful God. But this manifestation on Sinai was more than just about might. This was something they learned, that God is not just powerful, but he's not containable. He's not even controllable. It seems that God had become for them very domesticated, a kind of vending machine. We need help, sea is opened. We need food, manna, quails provided. But our God is mighty. He's he's also unpredictable. He's not containable for our purposes. And so King Solomon rightly said, even the highest heavens cannot contain you. In Isaiah we're reminded, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, said God, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And the psalmist rightly declares, our God is in the heavens and he does as he wishes. Not what I say. I remember some years ago having an experience of whitewater rafting. The instructor explained about the river being really unpredictable. And because of that, we had to show him that we were comfortable being under the water. We were comfortable being able to swim. And so very reluctantly, Bethel declined the opportunity because unfortunately she couldn't swim and she was gutted not to be able to do whitewater rafting. If you believe that, you'll believe anything. This was a real adrenaline rush. Flying down the river, not really flying down the river, you were kind of, what are you doing? Sailing down the river. You weren't sailing down the river. You were surviving down the river as you went down the mountain. And every now and again, something unpredictable would happen. On one occasion, the boat was suddenly banked up onto a rock, and we had to get out of the boat and try to move us off. And then on another occasion, there was a river that came in from the side and just threw us over and capsized us. The important thing was to stay close to the boat. We knew we were going to get to the bottom if we stayed close to the boat, but there was so much along the way that we couldn't control. It was uncontainable. What is your image of God? Mine is definitely too small, because his ways are higher than our ways. Many here will have read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And you'll have come across the character Aslan the Lion, the book written by C.S. Lewis. He's depicted as the true king of Narnia, and Lewis deliberately uses Aslan as a picture of Jesus. He's described as, quote, not a tame lion because of his power and unpredictability. He's both terrifying and comforting. Let me read an extract from the book where Mr. Beaver is explaining to the children who Aslan is. Aslan is a lion. The lion, the great lion. Oh, said Susan, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you. Often we can't we, try to contain God, but he's not containable. Sometimes we try to control God, but he's not controllable. Even if I was to spend a lifetime studying him, I won't come close to fully understanding him. So this demonstration of God's glory and holiness and power at Mount Sinai does teach us that God is holy and that God is powerful. But thankfully it also tells us something else, and that's this, that God is merciful. How can we say that from what we see in the story? Very simply because the same God who can make the mountains tremble and quake, that could make us quake in fear, he doesn't do that all the time. The experience of Sinai must have been awesome, with the mountain burning like a furnace, with the thunder and the lightning and the rumbling and the shaking and the trumpet blast. And sometimes I would love to experience that, but then I remember that everyone, including Moses, who witnessed it, was absolutely terrified. But for us as Christians, however, everything has changed. And yet God has not changed. He is still holy and powerful, and he must not be treated lightly. To understand the grace of God, we must first understand the terror of his holiness. And the message on the Mount Sinai Peninsula on that day was that God is holy. He is other. Keep your distance. But we are called into relationship with the same God. So how can we do that? Well, because now God has established a new covenant. We're going to hear about the covenant he established on the mountain next week. But we live under a new covenant, a new set of conditions set through his Son. A covenant of grace that's made possible by faith in Jesus. You see, God's holy wrath demonstrated at Mount Sinai was put on Jesus so that you and I could escape it because of his love and because of his mercy. And the thunder demonstrated at Sinai was quenched by what Jesus did. And probably 2 to 3 million people watched at the foot of the mountain and witnessed a terrifying sight. But as Christians, you see, we don't have to go to Mount Sinai. We come here and we join an invisible spiritual gathering of God's people in God's presence. And I'm going to read to you from Hebrews chapter 12, which talks about what our experience is now. You have not come, we're reading from verse 18, you have not come to a physical mountain, to a place of flaming fire, of darkness and gloom and whirlwind as the Israelites did at Mount Sinai. For they heard an awesome trumpet blast and a voice so terrible that they begged God to stop speaking. Put it back to the previous one. They staggered back under God's command. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. Moses himself was so frightened at the sight that he said, I am terrified and trembling. No, he said, Hebrews says, you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to countless thousands of angels in a joyful gathering. You have come to the assembly of God's firstborn children, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God himself, who is judge over all things. You have come to the spirits of the righteous ones in heaven, who have now been made perfect. You have come to Jesus, the one who mediates the new covenant between God and people, and to the sprinkled blood which speaks of forgiveness instead of crying out for vengeance. As we gather even here, we do so under a new reality, a new covenant. And we join with angels who have gone, and those who have gone before, to worship this holy God who is with us and even resides in us. We come boldly into his presence because of what Jesus has done. And we come to Jesus recognizing the forgiveness that comes through his sacrifice and the fact that God's holy wrath was satisfied in Jesus. So what? As I reflected on this, I thought I need to re-evaluate my image of God. And as I approach this coming week as a child of God, I need to take God more seriously, to approach him with a healthy awe and a holy heart. As we see here in Psalm 24, it says, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart. What's facing you this week? Is there a challenge that is heavy? Know this. The God of thunder, the warrior God, his power is in us to fight the battles. There's strength, there's fury, there is thunder. But we can't contain him. We can't control him. Maybe we expect too little of him. But even though his ways are beyond our understanding, and therefore to us unpredictable at times, we can trust him because he is good. Let's worship him now. The God of thunder, the God of holiness, the God of power, but the God of mercy. Thanks, Paul.